to House Bill 2066. Representative Kirk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Paul Kirkman, representative from 105th District. And House Bill 2066 would establish the Missouri Liberty Preservation Act. And this bill is in response to a federal bill that was passed earlier this year, the National Defense Authorization Act. In particular, in response to sections 1021 and 1022, which would authorize use of military force. I'll just put it this way, to basically treat American citizens the way we've treated terrorists and suspected terrorists in other parts of the world. It's a direct violation of the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment. There's all kinds of groups from the ACLU to the Council on American Islamic Relations to the Bill of Rights Preservation Organization who are in favor of this. The language of this bill. This bill simply says that it will be the policy of the state of Missouri that we will not share information with the federal government if they would like to use that information to arrest or otherwise detain U.S. citizens in accordance with sections 1021, 1022 of the National Defense Authorization Act. If they were to do that, then they could essentially detain American citizens indefinitely without being faced by your accuser, without charges, and without a trial. And if they chose to, they could even try you. If they eventually would get around to trying you, they could try you in a military court, which is a direct violation of the Fifth Amendment, unless you are a member of the armed services. If any public officer or anybody employed by the state would provide the federal government with the information that they would use to detain one of our citizens, they could be charged with a Class B misdemeanor. I'll take any questions.
To inquire. Representative, is this a bill that you brought forth because there's been several violations of this, or is this something you discovered for the protection of Missouri citizens? Where would that fall?
For protection of Missouri citizens, and I think that this is really important because in 2009, under the Bush administration put out a memo under the Department of Homeland Security. It was released under the Obama administration, and one of the parts of this memo recognized recent returning veterans who might be disgruntled as being flagged as being a possible terrorist threat. I'm a recent returning veteran. I spent a total of 10 years with the Marine Corps, and I'm pretty disgruntled because they turn around and try to take $600 a month from me because they decided to change my GI Bill contract after I had already used it. So there's reasons why veterans might be disgruntled. The Mayak report, which was kind of made famous a couple years ago, that identified people that supported third-party candidates as being possible militia-influenced extremists. So I think that we're seeing a particular trend here in which we might be just about ready to turn our back on the advice of Benjamin Franklin that we should trade our liberty for security, and those who do deserve neither and will most likely lose both.
I would imagine that you feel that way about the Patriot Act, although it's an attempt to protect us.
The definition of terrorism continues to get broader and broader and broader. And so I think that whenever they pass a bill like this that allows, authorizes military to treat U.S. citizens who might be suspected of terrorism the same way we would treat other people who are suspected of terrorism overseas on foreign battlegrounds. I think there's a huge cause for concern there because they basically got the Fourth and Fifth Amendment and the Sixth Amendment.
Would it involve or in any way restrict where law enforcement would get a court order or go through a legal process that would establish their situation where they would be required to make it? Does this have an effect on it?
This bill says that if we would provide, if we give them the information, if we in any way cooperate, so that way they can use Section 1021 and 1022 to detain a U.S. citizen without due process. Anybody who cooperates, if any member, any part of our state, office holder or otherwise, who's employed by the state, if they would participate in that, then they would be.
It's a good discussion. Right. Thank you.
Further questions?
Before I get to my real question, so bottom line is, if we comply with federal law, you want to charge us with a crime, right?
If that federal law would mean that I would be detained against my Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment constitutionally guaranteed rights.
So I'd say yes. Does it create any jobs, your bill? No, it doesn't.
I think it protects jobs because I'm employed right now, but if I get detained, I won't have a job.
No, if you lose your election, you won't have a job.
Well, if I have another job and I get detained, I won't have a job.
So, every once in a while I read these bills. And page 2, line 30, the General Assembly finds that, and then you list 4 things. And then you go on to find some other things. Can you tell me exactly what section 1021 of the National Defense Authorization Act says? And here's the reason why I ask. I seem to remember sitting through some hearings a year or 2 ago that had a similar, the General Assembly finds that. And it had to deal with crime statistics around sexually oriented businesses. And even though the testimony and statistics showed that crimes were fewer around sexually oriented businesses, the General Assembly found that they were higher. But at least we had cops and patrons and employees testifying as to what the crime stats were. But I don't want to find anything unless I know what it is that I'm finding out about. And now on a serious note, you've given us a nice, flowery premise introduction, but we still don't know what the meat and potatoes are. You say that it still violates my 4th Amendment rights. How? Well, I mean, what's the specific language in section 1021 that violates those rights, or 1022?
I can provide those 2 sections in entirety. If you'd like, I can email those to you. But I can tell you right now that it says in there that section 1021 specifically identifies indefinite detention without trial. It says that in there. 1022 goes a little bit further also. And in the big part in 1021, I think I got this right in 1021, and it says that if you're a U.S. citizen, you can be tried in a military court, which is a violation of the Bill of Rights. You can't be tried in a military court unless you are a member of the armed services. Because that would deprive you of your right to trial by jury.
Now, you believe in the separation of powers, right? Mm-hmm. This bill, I would think, kind of usurps the power and authority of the courts.
How so?
Well, a court would determine whether or not a federal act violates the Constitution. That goes all the way back to that Marbury versus Madison case. You know, it's not our job as a legislature to determine whether or not a certain federal law is unconstitutional. That's kind of the word I'm looking for.
This is where I'm going to disagree with you, because as we go about our duties of introducing policy or repealing policy, whenever we each took our oath of office, we swore to uphold and defend the Constitution. So if it's not the prerogative of the General Assembly to consider the constitutionality of the bills that we're introducing, why even have a General Assembly at all? Why not make us all appointments of the court?
If I follow your logic then, I assume that in 1965, Mississippi probably passed laws in the General Assembly that said the Civil Rights Act of 1964 violates the Constitution, and if you let that little black girl go to college with the whites, we're going to charge you with a misdemeanor or a felony.
Well, this bill specifically relates to Amendment 4 and Amendment 5. And if you want to go further and have a more philosophical debate, Amendment 9 and Amendment 10. But in the 4th and 5th Amendments, you as an American citizen have a right to trial by jury. This federal bill says that you do not have that right anymore. So if you think that it's okay to just detain American citizens just under the suspicion of terrorism, but not even tell them.
I'm not buying into that.
Well, I'm just saying, it sounds like that might be.
No, I'm trying to say that, you know, we sitting here as members of the General Assembly, you know, we're not a court, and I believe in the separation of powers. And I think that this bill violates the separation of powers. And I wish, you know, we had a great job before we could debate instead, because to be honest with you, I do think this would be fun about 2 a.m. after the bar kicks us out to debate. But to spend time in the General Assembly doing this,
well, I can tell you firsthand, seeing people that have been detained for suspicion of terrorism and on a battlefield, I think it's entirely, certain things are appropriate, but when the continental United States is pulled within the confines of the definition of a battlefield, I think that we need to make sure that we follow the advice of the founders and make sure that we're protecting
Hawaii and Alaska. I'm teasing. Mr. Chairman, I have slid into the realm of testifying, and I apologize. So I'm going to shut my yap and let you continue on the testimony on the bill.
Thank you. Any questions for the bill sponsor? All right. Anybody to testify in favor of House Bill 2066?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for an opportunity to stand before this illustrious committee. For the record, my name is Nathan Messer with Missouri Family Network. Appreciate the sponsor's interest in defending the rights of the citizens of this state.
Any questions? Thank you. Glad you got a witness for it. Anybody else to testify in favor of House Bill 2066? Seeing none, anybody to testify in opposition to House Bill 2066? Anybody for informational purposes only? All right, that will conclude the hearing on House Bill 2066. Thank you, gentlemen.